they try to cut corners with it, then they are going to have a problem. Yes, brands are going to get rid of agencies, and yes, people are going to lose jobs. I think if agencies get lazy and they do too much through AI, then I think that that's going to be a big problem for them.
So are you seeing clients need to rethink what informational content even means anymore?
So we're basically paying to give Google great content, to give the users the results that they need, and we're getting nothing from it. If the website doesn't have that, no amount of content or technical SEO is going to help. If I'm to be blunt and transparent, we're probably more profitable than the large agencies that I know.
Welcome back to the Agency Insider Show. I'm your host Navneet Kaushal, and today I'm incredibly excited because we have someone who I think represents what I especially best of a boutique specialist agency, which anybody can achieve in 2026. My guest today is Amanda Walls, the founder and director of Cedarwood Digital. If I'm not wrong, out of Manchester in the UK. Now here's what blew my mind about Amanda. She started Cedarwood about 9 years ago as a sole venture, deliberately choose not to be a full service agency, and instead went laser focused on three things: SEO, paid media, and digital PR. Fast forward today, she just swept 5 European Search Awards in 2025, and I think she's spoken 4 times in Brighton, including main stage and lots of other places. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, before we dive into the heavy stuff, I have to ask, I saw that you studied philosophy in school, and that's literally where your whole ethos, pathos, logos framework started. At what age did you realize you could connect ancient Greek rhetoric to getting people to click on search results?
Yeah, do you know what? It's so interesting that you say that. I did. So I studied philosophy at school, and I studied at uni as well. And Aristotle was one of kind of many philosophers that I studied. I did Aristotle, I did Plato, I did Epicurus, Cyrus Murdoch, Jean-Paul Sartre, etc. And I've actually found that through the whole 10 years that I've had Cedarwood, at different points, that's the one thing that I find from my education that has been most valuable to me, which is weird because I also did maths and science, and, there's more sort of traditional subjects. But I think with this particular topic, so with the ethos, pathos, and logos, it was about 2 years ago, I was looking back through some of my notes from school, and just kind of, I was doing a bit of clear out at home basically, and I came across my old sort of philosophy notes, and basically we used to have this huge book, and it was full of all the different readings that we used to do, and I was just looking at all the different concepts, and I thought, wow, do you know what, like ethos, pathos, and logos matches so well with SEO, because it really allows us to dive a little bit deeper into what we're actually trying to achieve. I think a lot of the times when I talk to people about SEO, they just say rankings. We want to get to position 1, we want to do this, we want to do that. And yeah, definitely, like absolutely. If you're in position 1 from a ranking perspective, it's going to do well. But if you're in position 1 for a keyword that nobody cares about, it's not going to do well. If you're in position 1 and people get to your website and they don't want to convert, it's not going to do well. And that's where I really thought, well, actually, what are the different parts of that funnel? And that really tied in with those learnings of Aristotle, right? So, the whole ethos, pathos, and logos, not just thinking about bringing people to the website, but also the logic behind why they would want to make a conversion decision. And I think most importantly is that the pathos, so the emotional side of it, like how do you build an emotional connection with the audience? We have, so here in the UK, we have 2,000 agencies, which is loads. And it's probably, to be honest, like a few people have said this, it's 1,000 too many. So, to stand out, we have to build some kind of emotional connection with our audience. We have to get people to think, I want to work with that brand for whatever reason it is. And it's the same for clients. It's the same for people doing SEO. It's not enough to just bring people to the website. You have to have that emotional connection with them to go, yeah, do you know what? I validate this business and I generally want to work with them. And that kind of stemmed back to a lot of the stuff that I did in school. But yeah, do you know what? I love studying philosophy. I used to do it last thing on a Friday. It was just a really, I don't know, it opened my mind. And I think now doing all of this in the 10 years at the agency, I've been able to learn a lot from it.
Okay. And so this one is actually interesting. So, and I also noticed something, your dog Ted. So has made appearance in your Brighton SEO slides text. Is Ted the unofficial mascot of Cedarwood Digital at this point?
Do you know what? So he is actually on our About Us page as the chief fluff. He's definitely the mascot. He also is on the background of my phone right now, is very much central to what I do. I've had Ted for 3 years now, so he's a golden retriever. He still acts like a puppy, so I take him anywhere and he just wants to play, and he comes into the office a lot, and I think people love, like the staff love that, because he's very fun. He's funny to be around, and he's kind of got over that stage now where he just eats everything, so doesn't eat the plants anymore, and he doesn't cause kind of general mayhem. Although if there is any food left lying around, he will definitely have that. Like he's not stupid, but he definitely is, and I think it's, we're really lucky to work in a place where we can have dogs in the office. And also, I don't want my dog sat at home all day by himself either when I'm here. So I think it just kind of brings something in that, it makes everyone feel a little bit more chilled. And it's just really nice to have dogs. They're just so like chill, aren't they? They're just such cool animals.
I agree. I love dogs. Yes. So now, you grew up partially in Asia, studied journalism, worked in Australian newsroom, and now you are running an award-winning digital agency in Manchester. So if 20-year-old Amanda in that Australian newsroom could see you now, what do you think she would be most surprised by?
The fact that I wasn't still in Australia, maybe. I think, to be fair, one of the most interesting things perhaps about running an agency is when I studied. So I think when people leave school, they don't know what they want to do. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I actually applied to do commerce engineering. So my dad was an engineer, my granddad was an engineer, my granddad on my other side was an engineer. I come from a sort of a family of engineers traditionally, who then kind of turned into, I guess, salespeople and MDs and that kind of thing. But so that had been what I wanted to do. And I actually got offered the opportunity to study journalism at a university in Australia. So I took the offer and I did that. And I worked in the newsrooms, and I did a lot of broadcast journalism. So I did some trackside reporting of the V8 supercars, and I kind of loved that. And I think what I would be most surprised to understand is how I've changed really that career into something that I knew nothing about. So when I actually left Australia, I didn't know anything about SEO. I didn't know anything about paid media. I didn't know anything about digital PR. I actually applied for a content role because I wanted to do something that was transferable from my degree, which was writing, I guess, because that's where my background was. I just so happened to be that content writing role was at an agency. And then that kind of exposed me to the world of SEO and such. And I think, I literally could have applied for a content role anyway. So I didn't specifically apply to a digital agency because I wanted to work in digital marketing. I just wanted something that was transferable with the skill set that I had. So I think probably the thing I'd be most surprised about is where I am now, because I wasn't from when I grew up, I wanted to start a business or I wanted to work in marketing per se. My career could have been really, really different. I think she'd probably be a bit shocked.
Okay. Now, let's talk to our first segment, digital PR, and through a journalist lens, which you've been. So, Amanda, a lot of digital PR people have never set foot in newsroom. You have actually been on the other side, receiving pitches, I'm sure working deadlines, understanding editorial calendars. Now, when you are now building a digital PR campaign for a client, what's one thing that your journalism training makes you do differently than most PR people completely miss?
I don't know if it's something necessarily done differently, but it's definitely something that we focus on. I just say to my staff, just get the first 3 lines right. Because at the end of the day, so I've worked in journalism, newsrooms for a period of time. So I started off when we had a lot more time, and I finished off when we had a lot less time, because we'd started the rise of kind of citizen journalism and the online space, which basically meant that journalists went from being, I would say, investigative reporters through to clickbait managers, essentially. So now a lot of journalists are, recorded based on how many clicks they get on their articles, because obviously the articles contain sponsorship and so on and so forth. It's more of a monetization. So I just say to them, a couple of things. Firstly, and I think everyone knows this, journalists are just overrun. Loads of big corporations have made a lot of cuts, particularly in the last couple of years, and journalists just don't have a lot of time. And the last thing a journalist wants to contend with is factual inaccuracies or spelling errors. They're kind of the 2 things that used to drive me nuts when I got press releases, because I think, factual inaccuracies, if I'm publishing something in the newspaper, I am ultimately accountable for that. So even if a PR person has sent me a press release that contains some information, if I haven't fact-checked that information and I can't validate it with good methodology, ultimately that falls on me as a journalist. So I think the first thing is being super explicit with your methodologies. So making it clear from the start where you've got that data from, what the trusted source is, making it really easy and quick for the journalist to validate that. I think a lot of people don't do that. I think a lot of people send out press releases with great information in it, but the methodology is not quite clear. And as a result of that, the journalist is left going, do I want to take a risk on this or not? And I think that's a really big thing. And then the other thing I would say is just those first few lines. So a lot of the time, I find that people pitch headlines that are they're very conversational, very narrative, almost like a nice start to a story. Like as a journalist, I don't need a nice start to a story. Like I'm trained to write that. What I want to know is, why am I going to publish this story? So what's the main data? What's the statistic? What is the jump out thing that is going to make people click on the article? That has to come first. I don't need a nice introduction, that kind of sets the scene. If I want to do that, I'll put that in the article myself. So I think those are probably the two things that I kind of reinforce as much as possible through digital PR to just try and get cut through, because again, there's a lot of digital PR agencies sending press releases out, and you have to cut through the noise and make journalists' job as easy as possible.
Right. Now, let's go a little tactical here. In 2026, the media landscape, course, has shrunk. Fewer journalists, more AI-generated content, more noise. So when Cedarwood sends a pitch right now, what does the email structure actually look like? Can you walk me through the anatomy of a pitch that's landing link for your clients today?
Yeah, sure. So I guess what I would say is a lot of what we're doing is more tailored pitching. So we don't do a kind of, we don't do a spray, like we won't target. I see some agencies targeting like 2,000 journalists in one go. We won't do that. It just doesn't work. Journalists don't want to see it. And also I think they know it's automated. The second thing that I would say is we don't use AI to write our pitches at any point. I think there's a place for AI in digital PR. I think there's a place for custom GPTs for things like newsjacking and link analysis and those more data-driven tasks, but we don't do any of that. So essentially, when we're putting it together, the first thing that we'll always try and do is include as much information as we can within the email itself. So I know some people will send like a short intro and then they'll attach a press release. We will try and put everything that we can in the body of the email. So we will start off straight away with heading. We will then put usually a couple of dot points that explain the methodology. So to my point from before, helping to reinforce why the journalist is, essentially going, yeah, I can trust this data. And we will then go into the narrative, which will usually have our expert comment in there. And we will also externally link from our expert comment to some information about our expert, because another big issue that we have in digital PR at the minute is the rise of fake experts, people using AI to generate that information. So we will then go through and kind of put that information in so that the journalist again has the reassurance the person that they're speaking to is genuine, and we'll then go and put the rest in. We will also sometimes attach images or a link to images that accompany the story. So again, the journalist doesn't have to chase, like they have everything that they need in one place. And that way we're kind of ticking all the boxes. So at the top, we've got that headline or that hook, really clear why they want to cover the story. We've then covered the methodology. So, what that methodology is and why it will work. We've then explained the expert and how they're genuine. And we've then attached anything additional they need for the story. And realistically, using that kind of 4-point structure, that's when a journalist will then go, cool.
So so there is no real attachment as such. Everything is in the mail itself.
Yeah. So we'll generally put everything in the body, because the other thing is what you tend to find with attachments is that sometimes attachments are more likely to flag spam. Because if journalists have particular, virus checkers, or like a lot of people have security software for good reason in their email inboxes. And what you tend to find is that anything with an attachment can get flagged, is more likely to get flagged, let's say, than things that are just written in the email body. So we will, unless we really need to attach something, we'll do like a link to a Dropbox, which will contain all the information so they can click through that if they want to. I mean, again, when you include links, that also has the risk of attracting spam, but I don't think as much as what you do in attachment, especially when people are trained not really to, we train our staff not to open attachments.
Right. Okay. Now here's something I find fascinating. You have previously, talked about reactive PRs and newsjacking, and I saw that you ran expert commentary campaigns around things like cervical cancer awareness week, Stoptober, and even pop culture hooks. How do you train your team to spot those windows in a real time? Is there a system or is it a gut instinct?
So for Reactive, we run what we call a reactive newsroom internally. So on Mondays and Wednesdays, we have 2 half-an-hour sessions where we get the whole team together. We have a big Excel spreadsheet, and we basically get them to spend, you know, a good half an hour going through the press, going through newspapers, going through publications, and putting all the ideas in there. If they see stuff kind of during the week, and they like, we've got a lot of, you know, Google alerts and things set up, Twitter alerts, etc., just to pull things in, then we'll get them to pop it in there as well. I also run what's called a reactive newsjacking GPT. So I've built a custom GPT, which essentially is trained on all of our clients, and it will scan the web, the whole web, for any news articles that relate to those clients, so relate to the, you know, the topics that they're covering or the area of expertise over the last 2, 3, 4 days, and it'll generate 5 ideas for each client, as well with a link to the you know, to the article. And I will always input that as well, and that's just a really nice way to save a lot of time, because obviously reading the newspaper takes a lot of time, but also to keep our clients, you know, trending and on top of that news. So we have that, I guess, 2 different ways. So we've got a manual way, and we've also got a more automated way.
Okay, now let's move to digital PR, and let's talk about the economics and ROI. I mean, so one of the talk you did in Brighton was literally titled "Creating Low-Cost, High-Return Digital PR Campaigns." For the agency owners listening who think digital PR means spending tens of thousands on a flashy data study, what does a realistic budget look like for a campaign that actually earns quality links?
So the main onus really of the talk I did in Brighton was that I think for digital PR, particularly when we started, a lot of people were doing these big hero campaigns. So they were taking 3 months to do one big campaign. They're spending a lot of money generating a lot of graphics and a lot of you know, content for it, and then they're outreaching it, and sometimes it wouldn't hit, and then everyone was like, right, you know, where are we at now? Realistically, I think that good digital PR ties back to what a journalist is looking for. They're looking for content that's going to get coverage, that's relevant to the audience, that's going to get clicked on because it's relevant now. So a lot of what we do from a digital PR perspective is always on. So this reactive newsjacking, this thought leadership, if you're able to jump on something that is, you know, super relevant and trending, like an example would be, we recently did a piece on fruit flies. So we've got a client in the catering industry, and we did a piece on, you know, how to keep fruit flies out of your fridge. That is super simple. That takes about, you know, 2 hours to put together, a little bit of research, an expert comment from the client, we send it out to press. That simple story has got tons of coverage, and it's got tons of coverage because it's got a really good human interest angle. Fruit flies, you know, they're really annoying. Like, I have them in my house, and they're a pain. So, you know, I want that information. I'm actively searching on how to get rid of them. It's seasonal, so there'll be certain times of the year due to the weather when they're more likely to come out, so we can kind of reuse that again, that press release, and resend it out at the right time of the year that coincides with that too. And that would take literally it'd be a couple of hours to pop it together. We do a couple of different pushes. We'll pop it into the comment bank so we can push it out again. You're probably looking at no more than 10 hours for that work, and it will generate reasonable links that are also hyper relevant to the client's topic of catering, because we're talking about a catering situation. So that's probably a really good example of where people can do it. And what I would say, I guess, to agency owners is that the days of hero campaigns are kind of gone. A lot of what people are talking about now with digital PR particularly is niche digital PR. So that is, we do a lot of work in your money, your life, you know, finance, medical, healthcare, insurance, etc. And what they really want is links from targeted websites. So, you know, to that end, it is more of the thought leadership and the reactive newsjacking and potentially some small data lake campaigns, but they're the ones that are really working now, and they don't cost that much. I mean, I think a lot of agencies now, if people are looking at figures, are probably doing $3 to $5 grand a month worth of, you know, reactive and proactive and thought leadership, and that's enough to move the needle in the niche space for sure.
Okay, now there's a growing conversation in the industry about the tension between digital PR and traditional PR. I saw a LinkedIn post from a PR consultant saying 7 PR pros for every 1 journalist now, and that's digital, and that digital PR often lack basic media etiquettes. Now, as someone who literally comes from the journalist world, where do you stand on this? Is there a credibility gap?
I think the only credibility gap exists if the individual makes one, and that is, you know, the problem with digital PR in a way is that there's a lot of people out there doing it fully AI. So there are companies out there now, and I won't name any, that are offering packages where you essentially have an AI agent sending thousands of press releases out to journalists, and that is what's giving digital PR a bad name, because that is making journalists feel like more negative towards the situation, because they're like, I don't have time for this. Like, my inbox is literally rammed full of AI written content that, you know, doesn't pass those tests, so it doesn't have a good, you know, kickoff line. Most importantly, I generally can't validate the data, and sometimes it's an AI expert that doesn't even exist. So actually, for a journalist, that's a complete nightmare. And I think because of that, you know, if they're then getting a press release from a well-established, like, you know, normal traditional PR agency, then potentially they would go, okay, well, actually I know who these guys are, so, you know, I understand that you have the right qualifications. I think the other thing that I would say between digital PR and traditional PR is, so we work with a number of clients that have their own traditional PR agency, and they very much like to manage those relationships. So in those instances, we can't outreach to top tier press, we can't outreach to the dailies and the regionals, we only handle niche press. And I think for, you know, to marry that difference between traditional and digital PR, it's very important for brands in particular to understand what they want to get out of those companies, because, you know, blocking digital PRs from doing national and regional could be difficult depending on how they approach it. In my opinion, I think, you know, digital PR is probably better suited to the niche style of outreach, because it is more for SEO, whereas traditional PR traditionally is more for brand awareness, and therefore you do want that bigger reach and that bigger catchment area. But I don't necessarily know that it's a trust gap. I think just the problem is that digital PR is more infiltrated by AI, which is what leads journalists to lose confidence.
Right. Now, if you had to choose, would you rather your team land one link on a highly relevant niche site with a, let's say, a DR of 45, or 5 links on a general news site with DR 80 plus, and why?
Yeah, so definitely the DR45, the first option. So a lot, like pretty much all of what we do is focused on that niche link building, and we've seen over the years that moves the needle. I think the main reason why is because if we think about how Google looks at websites in particular, and I think especially in an AI space, it wants that trust and that semantics. Most importantly, it wants to understand those link gaps. And what I would say is that, you know, most companies can land top tier publications. They're not particularly difficult. Like, most people can land, you know, here in the UK, we have like the Daily Mail, the Guardian, the Sun, the Express, etc. Most PR agencies can land that, and they can land that well. Where it's harder for PR agencies to land coverage is on those niche publications, because they often need to make it a little bit more tailored. And those publications, in my opinion, are pickier about the content that they want to take, because they know what their audience is. And their audience is probably hyper relevant to the brand that's trying to land the content there. So if we're able to get coverage on a hyper relevant publication, that's a massive trust signal for Google, because, and also the other factor is whether people like this or not, they generally do follow links. You know, those kind of hyper relevant, you know, DR45s are the do follows. The top tier publications now are very rarely, and you know, there's value in both, but I still think that does move the needle a little bit more in terms of what we've seen.
Absolutely. Now let's move to our next segment, the Aristotle framework, ethos, pathos, and logos for SEO. I think this is one of the original framework I've seen anyone in SEO develop in the last few years. You are essentially taking 23-year-old framework from Aristotle and saying this maps perfectly onto EE80, and it's the missing piece of conversation. For our listeners who haven't seen your Brighton SEO talk, can you break down how you map ethos, pathos, and logos onto an actual SEO campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, when I initially kind of discussed this concept back at Brighton, I said that there were almost like 3 pillars of trust, let's say, more than anything else, to back up an SEO campaign, and that these 3 pillars go consistently across all elements of SEO. So I think traditionally when we look at SEO, we look at technical SEO, we look at content, and we look at digital PR. And I think a lot of the times we do those in silo. You know, we do a technical SEO audit, and then we do a bit of content, then we do a bit of digital PR, but we don't think about what we're actually trying to build within an audience to push them through the funnel. Because, you know, fundamentally SEO is about sales, right? So at the end of the day, people, you know, SEO is a means to an end. So people invest in SEO. They don't do it for the ego of getting to position 1. Well, I mean, a few people might, but most people don't. They do it because they want to get more sales. They do it because they want to get more leads. So realistically, what I was trying to get through is we need to break away from this silo of technical content and digital PR, and we need to think about actually what drives the sales to push that SEO, and then mapping that back to SEO. So, you know, for example, if you were to look at Pathos, right, which is the emotional side of things, what we would say there is that in every element of that, so technical content and links, you have that the ability to build that emotion. So from the link side of things, it's the way your brand is perceived externally. So, you know, doing an audit of how your brand is seen, like, are there positive or negative reviews? Are the way that is your brand quoted in publications that you want to be seen against, so that when people go to do that external research, aren't they reinforced that you are the right kind of brand that they want to work with? And then on site, you know, from an emotional perspective, okay, how do we get people to convert? Well, I think a big part of that is that the experience element really of EEAT. So that user generated content is a good example, you know, seeing people in a situation and understanding how they actually relate to that. And one of the examples that I gave was from the Google Quality Rater Guidelines. So there was an example there, and it said, you know, in terms of content, like, let's use an example of a pregnant woman who's trying to sleep, right? And we want to create some content for them. And in one instance, someone might be looking for like an expertise-led article, so like a medically backed article, understanding, okay, what medications can I take, or what do I need to do medically to be able to do that? But then on the flip side, someone else might be looking for an experience-based article. So what they really want is someone who's been in that situation to come and tell them, you know, this is what I did and it worked. And that's two wholly different approaches to it. But depending on, you know, how you want to attract that person emotionally, you pick one or the other, right? And either of those is going to appeal to different people. So when we think about content from an emotional perspective, it's really understanding, you know, when people are coming to the website, in addition to, you know, giving them the trust and the reassurance and the expertise that we need, because that does play an important role. Most importantly, are we resonating with them, is probably the best way of putting it, to a point where they go, yeah, do you know what, actually, like, that's really relatable. And now as a result of that, I'm going to go and, you know, build that, buy that product, or engage with that service because I feel they understand me. And it's that, you know, you're building that relationship with them. So that is a really big part of the framework. I think the other biggest part of the framework is mainly the logos. So it's kind of the logical side of things. So being able to explain to someone, like, logically why they should work with this brand. And that comes back, that's stripping it back to basics. So, you know, for an e-commerce perspective, okay, I want to buy a product. So where's my shipping information? Where's my about us page? Where's my contact us page? How do I contact someone if I have a problem with a product? I've encountered a brand I've never met before, I don't know anything about them. I'm building that emotional framework with them. But also, if I've got a problem with that product, like, logically, what do I do? Like, how do I contact them? How do I return it? And do I trust that returns process is going to be, you know, genuine and legitimate, and all of those things? So, you know, I think that side of the framework is also very important, because it's kind of, and the two are often polar opposites, right? The emotional side and the logical side, they don't necessarily go together. But if you can get them to work together, and you can combine, you know, a great piece of content and a digital PR campaign that buys in emotionally with that plain logic of being able to explain to people why, then it's a big case for reinforcing that trust and the pathos side of things, and kind of bringing it all together in one way. So I guess it's a different way of thinking about it from an SEO perspective. But it kind of draws us away from getting so granular just on rankings, and actually understanding how do we drive ROI. And I think as we move into an AI space, that's going to become really important.
Okay. Now, you mentioned in a stat in one of your talk that 87% of the people will leave the conversation funnel if they read a negative review or a mention. Now, that's actually a staggering number. How does that connect to your ethos approach, and what do you practically tell a client to do about their brand perception?
So the first thing that we always tell them to do is a brand audit. And that is physically looking at what they do online. And interestingly, one of the things that I said in this talk when I did it is I asked people to raise their hands, and I said, how many of you Google yourself on a daily basis? Literally no one. Yeah, you're probably a great example, but in general, I'd say less than half the room said that. And I said, you know, how many of you Google your business on a daily basis? And again, it was virtually no one. And I said, well, then you have absolutely no idea what people are saying about you. Like, you could go online and you could all of a sudden have a drop off in leads. You could be really confused as to why that's happening. And then you could actually Google yourself and find that someone somewhere has written a really negative review, because there's a lot of websites out there that just accept reviews. You know, they're not necessarily verified. They tend to rank well. There's a lot of concerns with that. So I actually gave in the presentation some examples of, you know, just like site searches that people can do, and then, you know, do your brand name, do like plus reviews, so you can understand if someone is searching for that element. to start to understand. And that's the beginning of a brand audit, you know, understanding how other people perceive you, because when you're working in the brand, it's really, really hard, I think, to understand how people perceive you. And I speak to a lot of other agency owners, and I think one of the most important things we have in a conversation, which we say to each other, is, what do people think of us? Because I'm like, you know, I say to people, what do people think of Cedarwood? Because I'm in Cedarwood and I see it from a Cedarwood perspective, but I don't see it from like another agency's perspective, or I don't see it from a brand's perspective. I only see it from my perspective. And I think that statistic of 87% of people who read a bad review, and you know what, I've been there too. Like if I read a bad review about a brand, particularly if there's a couple of them, it does put me off, because there's so many other options out there. I can just go, well, do you know what, I've got another 5 places I can purchase that from that quite frankly don't have that negative connotation or that bad review. But we notice it a lot in Your Money, Your Life. Even if there's one bad review and it's the most recent one, so it's at the top of the page, the drop off in conversion rate is significant. So I genuinely think that this element of brand auditing and Googling yourself essentially is really important.
Okay. Now, so here's what I want our listeners to walk away with. If they are an agency owner and they go back to their team tomorrow and say, we are implementing the Aristotle framework, what are the first 3 things they should audit on their client's website?
So I think the first thing that they need to do, and I know this is difficult, is put themselves in the shoes of a person that's coming to their website for the first time. Because a lot of the times that's how people are. They're coming, you know, to the website for the first time and asking them, do you buy into this brand? Do you understand fundamentally what this brand is about? Like, do you understand the background of the brand? Do you understand why you would trust it? Do you understand why it's going to provide you with a reliable product or service? I think those, you know, really starting to understand what that first time user journey looks like is important. I think secondly, I would say to do a brand audit. So to that point that we're making before, like, I think that brand audit, that external validation is important. Now, Google tells us all the time that it trusts external validation more than it trusts whatever we put on the website, because frankly, you know, we could put whatever we wanted on the website, right? I could put 1,000 amazing reviews on the website, but without external validation, it doesn't mean anything. So I think that the second part of understanding that is looking at what people are saying about you externally. So go and Google yourself, go and understand what people are saying, you know, go and understand how people feel about you off the back of that. And then, you know, you're looking at how people feel about you on site, you're looking at how people feel about you off site, and you're starting to get an understanding of how the brand is. And then I think finally, I would say, do the basic logic side of things. So have a checklist and go, do I have an about us page? Do I have a contact us page? Does my form work? Do I have reviews on the site? You know, all those really basic things that I think a lot of the time get overlooked. So even things like industry accreditations, you know, do I have that external validation from an industry accreditation perspective? Am I updating my content? Has my content been verified? All those little trust signals, those logical trust signals that go on the website that build that reassurance. Because at the end of the day, like, that person on the website is only gonna leave if you give them a reason to, right? Because they've come onto your website, they've come on because you've got a product or a service that they want. So there's no reason that they won't inquire unless you give them a reason not to. And I think what you need to do is find out what those reasons are.
Okay, let's move to our next session, which is the next segment, user intent. You wrote something that stopped me in my track. You showed how for a keyword like payday loans, there were 15 changes in the top 10 positions in a single year, because Google understanding of user intent for that term was evolving. Now, how often should agencies be auditing whether their client still matches, or their client's content still matches with what Google think the intent is?
I mean, the payday loans is that SERP in particular is incredibly volatile. So we have clients in that space, and it changes regularly. And a lot of that is because you have kind of one trick ponies. So people that come in and they set up websites, they'll, you know, boost them up by buying links, etc., and then they'll disappear out. But I think in general, what it teaches us is that intent does change. And I think across the board in the last 18 months, we've seen that quite a lot. So we have, for particular e-commerce sites, I think we're seeing a lot of a change in user intent from informational through to commercial. So actually we're stripping out content now more than we ever have before. In the past, I think SEO was very much like, write blogs and add more content, more content, more content. But actually now we're saying less content, get rid of those blogs that you've written, you know, cut it back down to just that commercial focus, because fundamentally that's what Google wants. In general, every month we will rerun the SERP analysis and understand what that intent is. Now, obviously, intent is subjective. We use Ahrefs for our intent analysis. They have a really good intent analysis tool. I also use ChatGPT's natural language processing function. I think you can also use IBM Watson to do it. And that, again, will give me an understanding of kind of what it deems the intent to be. And what I'll do is kind of blend them all together to get a good understanding of what I think that intent is. On Your Money, Your Life, it changes a lot more than it does on traditional SERPs. So I think with that, it's definitely once a month. You could probably get away with once every 3 months on the others. But what I would say is that you want to be ahead of the curve, because on payday loans, I think a lot of the companies just assumed, because it was always really quite informational, it was always quite guide driven, and it was always ranking to a lot of deeper pages. And then that changed about 18 months ago, and it ranked to a lot of home pages, and it was more commercial driven. And I don't think people were ready for that shift, because they got caught out. And now actually a lot of people are coming to us and saying, we've seen a drop off. What's happened? And I'm saying it's because your intent has changed and you've not kept up with it. So I think in those sectors, it really needs to be once a month, and it doesn't have to take long. You can set up an audit to do. You could even set up something on like a ChatGPT to just run through 5 or 10 of your pages and map it back to what it's got stored from the previous month, so that you can start to understand what those shifts in the SERP look like. But it's I mean, in Your Money, Your Life, you have to be doing it, otherwise you are going to get left behind.
Right now, so you also made the distinction between experience-led and expertise-led content from the quality data guideline. The pregnancy example, where somebody, sometimes you need a doctor expertise, and sometimes you need a mom's lived experience. Now, in practice, how do you decide which type of a content a page needs? Is this a gut call, or is there a data-driven way to figure it out?
I think something it can be both. I think first off, you have to have an understanding of who your audience is. So if you are like, babycenter.com, let's say, where you're a forum and you have a lot of mums on there, that experience-led content is naturally going to lend itself to the type of website that you have. If you are WebMD, or a medical-driven website, then that expertise-led content is going to lend itself to that. If you're in between, and you're just trying to offer this information, generally what we will do is we'll analyze the SERP and we'll understand what type of content is being ranked, positions 1 to 10. So we'll look at things like, we will look at the intent. So we'll look, is it transactional? Is it informational? Is that hybrid? Whatever the case might be. But we'll also look at the tone and the formality and the natural language processing across those top 10 results. And if, let's say, 7 of them are experience driven and 3 of them are expertise driven, then we will lend our content to the experience side. There is a way that you can do both. Like, you can definitely offer both those opportunities in there as well. But I think if you're looking from a data-led perspective, I would analyze the SERP, use a natural language processor tool like an IBM Watson or a ChatGPT to understand, what the kind of concept is on there, and then make a decision from there with your audience in mind, of course.
Okay, and let's talk about the 3 C's of intent. Now, you developed the 3 C's of intent framework: content type, content format, and content angle. Let's make this really practical. Let's take a YML keyword, say best life insurance for young families. So can you walk me through how you would apply these 3 C's to decide what to create?
Yeah, sure. So, for example, if we're choosing best life insurance for young families, so the first thing that we would look at is the content type. So we would do a SERP analysis to understand what type of content is returning in the search results. Now, for that particular type, you're probably going to get listicles in terms of a best of, but sometimes you won't. Sometimes you will get a product page or a service page. So the first thing we're going to do when we understand the content type is have a look at the search results and work out what kind of content we need to create to sort of hit that market. So if it's a listicle, is it a product page? Is it an information page? Most likely it'll be a listicle, but in some instances it's not. Sometimes it could be a guide, like a guide to the best, etc., etc. So once we've done that and we understand what the content type is, we then obviously move on to the content format, and that content format will be, okay, so let's say it's a listicle. What kind of listicle are we looking at, and what information do we need to include within that listicle? So are we looking to rank the top 5, the top 10, the top 20? Are we looking to include things like pros and cons? Are we looking to include costs? Are we looking to what, I guess, features are we looking to compare and analyze? So when we look at everyone else in the SERP, what are they comparing and analyzing? Because we don't want to be missing something out. So yeah, you know, cost, how long? So is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? Does it cover, you know, all family members, just adults, just children? And from a format perspective, it's trying to understand, you know, what actual physical format that we want. And then finally, we want to understand what actual information we want in there and also how recent we need that information to be. So a lot of these best of lists in particular, they won't rank things that are from 2024. So it's how frequently do we need to keep this information updated and keep it relevant to make sure that it ranks at the top of the search results. And that means often going back and kind of redoing that content, you know, every 3 months, every 6 months, every year, you know, depending on what everyone else is doing. And really by using that framework, that allows us to understand what type of content we want to write, what information we want to put on there, and how frequently we need to keep it updated, and if there's any external validation that we need.
Okay. Now, with AI overviews and zero-click results eating into informational queries, how is user intent shifting at the top level of the funnels? So are you seeing clients need to rethink what informational contents even means anymore?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we're having a lot of conversations with our clients about this at the minute, because I think clients feel frustrated that they're creating amazing informational content and then Google's scraping it and taking it, and they're not getting any credit for it. Like they are in terms of a citation perspective, but they're not getting anyone coming through to the website. And that it's definitely frustrating because, you know, at the end of the day, SEO is ROI. And you can go to the board and you can say, we've created this amazing content and it's featuring on Google and looks really good. And all they're doing is saying, so what? Like, so what does that mean for us? So what does that mean from a business perspective? Like, that's lovely. So we're basically paying to give Google great content, to give the users the results that they need, and we're getting nothing from it. And that, I think, is an incredibly difficult conversation. And when we're talking about user intent, you know, user behaviors as well, there was a statistics that came out from Ahrefs, and they said, I think last year, it was back in January, they said 30% of like CTR had gone to zero click, and that now when they reran it at the start of this year had gone to something like 58%, which is an astronomical amount of clicks to potentially be lost. When you then consider that you've got you know your paid ads underneath that, so by the time you get to your organic search, it's really dwindling. Like you don't have much left from that perspective, which is, you know, a bit of a nightmare, I would say, for people in SEO. But I think we have to frame it differently. And when we're talking about user intent, that links back to ethos, pathos, and logos. So this concept of pathos, this concept of emotional buy-in, if people are starting their journey in AI, then we need to understand that that's probably the first way they're going to find us. So that's what they're most likely going to use in terms of weighing up, you know, which agency they're going to go with, which brand they're going to go with, which product they're going to use. That still plays a really important part of the funnel. I think the challenge that we're having is, how do we measure that? Because, you know, there's a lot of different tools out there that can say, yes, you appear in the AI overlays, and that's great, but we have no real visibility of what that means, but we know it's contributing. You know, we had an inquiry the other day from a company that wanted to work with us, and they'd found us on an AI search. Now, I was like, you know, they didn't even come onto our website. They literally didn't know that much about us. They'd been rated, you know, we'd been ranked in an AI search. They'd come to us and so on and so forth. Now, if I was, you know, attributing that lead, I'd say, well, you know, where am I attributing that to? Because I can't attribute to organic search. You know, we've got AI and that's great, but I still know it's doing something for the business. And I think in terms of user intent, the big point there is that, you know, we need to understand that AI is reinforcing some of those really, really important signals, even though it's not doing it explicitly in a way that's easy for us to report to other people.
Okay. Now, let's move to our next segment, which is SEO and YMYL. I mean, you have built your reputation around YMYL SEO, finance, insurance, healthcare, legal. Now, these are exactly the sectors where AI hallucination is most dangerous and where Google has to be most careful about what it surfaces. So are you seeing Google tighten EE80 requirements specifically for YMYL sites, or is it loosening up with AI overviews?
So I mean, this is difficult. It's an interesting question. I think fundamentally what we're seeing with Google is that it's trying to be risk averse. And interestingly, actually, I'm talking at Brighton again this time, where I'm talking about the trust layers that are driving modern rankings. So one of the biggest things that I'm saying is that, you know, AI now is like a risk management tool for your money or life. So if it doesn't explicitly like trust something now, it simply won't return it, because AI doesn't have the ability to validate that in the way that Google does. And what I'm trying to get across in the talk is that, you know, if you own your money or life, you absolutely have to build brand reputation. You absolutely have to build trust. Niche link building is essential, because this AI needs all of these points of validation to be able to trust it. And now with AI as a validation tool, if it doesn't, it simply won't. But in healthcare, it is concerning. I saw a post actually yesterday on LinkedIn from a study that had been published in Natural Medicine about kind of ChatGPT health. There were some statistics that came out of it that were really interesting. So they basically said, like in 84% of simulations, because people had been asking it for health advice. And this is the concern. And they were saying that, in 84% of simulations, someone had been suffocating and they sent, book an appointment in the future. And 64% of people who were completely safe were told to seek immediate medical care. And then, 51% of cases where people needed to go to the hospital immediately, it had recommended that they stay at home or book a medical appointment. And I think, that's a big problem. Like, that is a huge problem. And I've not sort of read through the entirety of the study myself, so this is obviously just what I've seen has come out of it. But AI is very much trying to be that validation tool. I appreciate there's a long way to go with it, and I think in Your Money or Life we're definitely the behest of it. And I think if now we don't get the trust right, what we're going to end up with is a situation where Google simply won't return us in search, and that's kind of how it's going to be.
Okay, now let's talk about something very practical for agency owners. When you onboard a new YMYL client, say a personal injury law firm or a private healthcare clinic, what does your EAT audit look like in the first 30 days, and what are the non-negotiable elements you check?
So, we actually do quite a lot of work in the personal injury space. The first thing that we would look at in that particular, firstly is reviews. So reviews and external validation is the very first thing that we look at. So before we look at actually anything on the website itself, we will look for that, in line with the point that I kind of just made about AI. We will look for that external validation to understand, are people saying good things about your brand? Do people trust it? Is Google going to trust it? So on and so forth. Because if Google doesn't trust it externally, you're only going to get to kind of a certain point. And one of the things that I'll be talking about again in Brighton is this sort of trust ceiling that you get to. So, you do a great technical audit, you do a great content audit, you do an on-site EAT audit, but your website isn't improving. It's because you've hit this trust ceiling that you haven't got to a point where Google trusts you enough externally to break through the ceiling. And so the first thing that we look at when we take on a new client in that first 30 days is, are you able to break through this trust ceiling to actually get AI and Google to return you with confidence in the particular sector you're looking at? And that's the brand audit and everything along that. The second thing we will do is look at the on-site side of things and go, right, okay, do you have things like your industry accreditations? And the other thing is, do you have a really clear brand entity? And I think in YMYL, Google is really looking for that entity SEO side of things. So a really clear understanding of who the brand is, who owns the brand, why they're experts, why they're trustworthy. Like, do you have in that knowledge graph and in that entity network enough trust and enough kind of validation to be able to back up that theory? So we'll start having a look at it from that perspective, and auditing that. And that comes a long time before the technical SEO, the on-site content, because fundamentally, if this website doesn't have that, no amount of content or technical SEO is going to help.
Okay. Now, let's talk about AI impact on agency SEO. Now, how is Cedarwood using AI internally right now? Not the hype. What actually changed in your day-to-day operations?
So we use AI mainly in our digital PR team. We use it to do, so there's actually kind of, 5 main ways that we use it right now. So the first way is we use it for newsjacking, as I kind of mentioned earlier. So we use it to basically to simplify processes. So I'm actually doing a talk at Digital PR Summit coming up, and one of the things that I'm doing is using an example of how we see AI in society. And I've got this really cute picture of, there's a couple of robots, and I'm sat at home with my dog and that kind of thing, and one of the robots is doing the washing, one of the robots is doing the vacuuming. And basically the analogy that I'm trying to make is that, AI shouldn't be running our daily lives, but what it should be doing is all these like little accessory things that take a lot of time, but it can kind of clean up really nicely. So things like the vacuuming, things like the washing, those things take a lot of time, but they're fundamentally repetitive tasks that can be easily trained to do. They don't necessarily require like a huge amount of brain power to run a vacuum around or to do the washing. Although, to be fair, in my household, you know, certain members do struggle with the concept of the washing temperatures, but that's fine, you know, to each their own. But I think the main thing really is, you know, so we use AI for things like doing the washing, the proverbial doing of the washing and the vacuuming of the floor in the agency. So that'll be the reactive newsjacking. It'll be things like we have a compliance GPT that essentially runs our press releases through like a compliance checker before we send it to the external compliance at other companies, and it just pulls out risk, like does a risk score, and it pulls out risk for companies in your money or life. Is very important, saves time on their side, you know, from a compliance perspective as well. So I think that's valuable. We do that for the niche link building. We do all of our link gap analysis through GPT, so it's essentially trained to like synthesize large pools of data from tools like Ahrefs and understand what those niches are, those specific niches are, and kind of list, okay, you know, these are the niches where you've got like the biggest link gap and where you kind of need to, you know, address that. And I think that that's a really important element. We also use it to understand semantically what kind of content journalists like to cover. So, you know, to look at what they've covered recently and what, you know, which journalists might be best suited for which story. I think that also, you know, kind of plays a big part in it. And then we have one that needs a bit of work, but it like does coverage scanning, so it basically scans the web for mentions of our clients. That again is a hugely time consuming job for our staff, you know, just like looking through and understanding where we've got links. So this coverage tracker helps to essentially just take the heavy lifting from that, which leaves our staff the time to focus on things like strategy, ideation, writing great press releases, you know, doing good hooks, repitching, pivoting, and that kind of thing. So that's mainly how we use it.
Okay. Now there's a fear in the agency world that AI will commoditize SEO, that client will just use ChatGPT instead of hiring agencies. Now you are sitting at the intersection of YMYL and digital PR, which are both areas where expertise is hard to automate. Now, do you see that as a moat for Cedarwood? And what's your honest take on where agency value lies in, say, 2027?
I think agencies will continue to be valuable if they don't get lazy. So I think if agencies get lazy and they do too much through AI, then I think that that's going to be a big problem for them, because all that then, you know, all their clients are then going to see is, because it's fairly easy to see when something's been written with AI, I think, in most cases. And I think if clients start to see, like, you know, huge technical SEO audits, let's say, where no one's actually been in and understood the concept of what we're trying to do, and it's just churned out, it's been done in ChatGPT, I think they're going to go, why are we paying for this? Like, it's a waste of time. Same with content. If the content looks AI written, you know, again, it's going to be a waste of time. Digital PR is harder to do through AI because, you know, you need genuine experts, and you still need to monitor the news, you need to do all of those things. So, you know, look, I think if agencies are lazy with it and they become too reliant on it, they try to cut corners with it, then they are going to have a problem. Yes, brands are going to get rid of agencies, and yes, people are going to lose jobs. I think if people are smart with it and they use it to do those, you know, laundry folding and vacuuming tasks that I think it should be used for, like, yeah, of course, I mean, you probably are going to reduce headcount because you're simply not going to need as many people to do that. But you need to be able to refocus, and I think people need to adapt, and they need to understand how to utilize AI to make themselves better at their jobs as opposed to replacing their jobs. And if people do that, I mean, I'm not concerned from Cedarwood's perspective about AI, because I don't think that AI can do what we do. And we're not overly dependent on it like we still do, especially at the pitching process. That's one thing that I really don't think AI can do, you know, really being able to analyze and understand a challenge. When we're talking about things on a more emotional scale, like the Ethos, Pathos, Logos, I don't think AI has the ability to do that yet, maybe in the future, but I don't think right now. So yeah, I just think, like, I'm not too concerned about it from my perspective, but I think agencies who are being lazy with it should be.
Okay. Now, are you tracking client visibility in LLM outputs like ChatGPT, Gemini? And if so, how? And is this becoming a deliverable your clients are asking for?
Do you know what? It's actually becoming a bit of a nightmare, if I'm being honest, because what we're finding is that clients are asking for a lot of things with AI and LLMs. And we're having to have quite honest conversations with them to say, look, we're learning too. You know, realistically, ChatGPT has only been around. I mean, I know it's been around for a while, but in the mainstream for what, like 12, 18 months. So we're still learning how to effectively report on it. We're still learning how to do it. There's a lot of tools out there that do it. I don't think any do it particularly amazingly. I've seen a lot of statistics. So like, for example, with ChatGPT, with the Google AI overlays, it was saying that I think it's only 1 in 250 searches returns the same result. And then with Perplexity, it's something like 1 in 5,000. I don't know how you possibly report on that. That's difficult. If, you know, if these LLMs are changing their answer every single time, it's nigh and impossible to report on visibility, because it's not going to be a case. You can obviously report on traffic because you've got things like GA4 that will allow you to have some understanding, you know, of a source from ChatGPT.
Or the reference and the source, right?
Exactly, and I think that's the base level at which you can do it. But no, you know what, admittedly, it's hard. I think it's really, really hard, and I think we and a lot of other agencies are struggling to be able to do that, because the nature of LLMs is they're constantly changing.
Okay. Let's come to the last segment of our site, which is agency building. Now, there are a few things about how you have built Cedarwood that are genuinely contrarian. No outbound sales, no accounts manager. You deliberately stayed at a 14 people when others would have scaled at 50. Can you walk me through the philosophy? Why do you believe smaller is better? And is there a number where you would say, okay, that's our ceiling?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we're pretty much at our ceiling now. If I'm to be blunt and transparent, we're probably more profitable than all the large agencies that I know. So fundamentally, I don't see the point of, you know, going through the hassle and the stress and the drama of growing by another, you know, 30 people to make exactly the same amount of money that we're making now, or potentially, you know, with more risk, with more hassle, with more headaches. You know, business essentially at the end of the day is about, you know, we want to do a couple of things. We want to do good, we want to give back to the community, but ultimately everyone's in business to make money. And if we're going to make the same amount now as what we would at 50, I don't see the point. So like fundamentally, I guess that's quite a blunt answer, but that's why we want to stay at the size that we are. From the flip side of that, obviously, is that, you know, the no account managers side of things. So the beauty about being at our size is that people can work with a genuinely experienced team. So, you know, in our digital PR team, I think even our most junior staff member has 5 years experience, you know, right the way through to sort of 10 years with our most senior members. So because we don't have a large base, we don't have to bring in a ton of inexperienced staff. We can bring in the right people. We don't have to hire quickly. You know, we can take our time hiring to make sure that we're bringing the right people into the business, which I think is very important. And that again is valuable for our clients. So, you know, from a size perspective, we could maybe get to 16, potentially 17. I wouldn't go any more than that. I think that's more than big enough for us. That's, you know, we're comfortable at that, and our clients, they buy into small agency. So, you know, we also need to be aware that that's one of our biggest selling points.
Okay. Now, you've been one of the most impressive conference speaking records of any agency founders in the UK. Brighton SEO 4 times. Now you are attending, doing the talk 5th time, international stages across 3 continents. For agency owners listening who want to build their personal brands through speaking but don't know where to start, what's your actual playbook? And how did you get that first speaking slot, and how has it compounded?
So I think I was fortunate because obviously growing up, I trained in broadcast journalism. So I learned a lot about public speaking, and I'd learned a lot I was fairly confident in front of cameras and in front of stages. So that naturally came to me, whereas I think for many people, it's not something that, you know, they potentially enjoy, which is difficult. But what I would say, so my first ever talk that I did was at a really small conference actually here in Manchester called Missing Link Live. It was just a room full of like, I don't know, 30 people, where I delivered a talk. And then a couple of months later, I went to an event called Sheffield DM, which was a local meetup again here in here in the UK. And that was, I think it was maybe like 50 people there, and I did a talk there. And so that helped to build confidence. And then I progressed to kind of Brighton SEO. I did a fringe event there first, the online PR show. And then I just built it up. And I think that, you know, you have to start out at these small events. Like even here in Manchester, so we run an event called Manchester DM, where we try and encourage first-time speakers particularly to get up on stage and kind of give it a go, because, you know, it's a really supportive environment. It's not, you know, and you will know this because you do a lot of talks, as you get to those bigger stages, there's definitely bigger expectations for what you're going to be delivering. You know, you really have to kind of have the experience, I think, and the confidence and know what goes into a great presentation to be able to give people what they want in 20 minutes. Whereas when you're starting out, you're going to learn. Like, there's loads of things in my first presentations I look at now and go, oh my goodness, like I wish I'd not included that, or that's, you know, that's shocking. Like, I could have made that better, so on and so forth. And it's just like anything, you have to learn, and it will take time. So it might take 2 or 3 years before you get to do a lot of bigger talks. But I think you will get there if you have the confidence and you put the time into rehearsing, learning, and also attending conferences and watching other people talk to learn from them.
And I think with the YouTube, what I'm doing right now with having a YouTube, it's easier to try, at least with a YouTube. At least it helps building the confidence, that I would say.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I would definitely agree with the YouTube side of things. You know, and just doing, like, even doing podcasts and conversations with people, I think is important. Like, that again is because also you know, you're learning. And I think the other thing that I would say actually that I think is really important is you have to be confident in what you're talking about. So pick a subject that you know really, really well inside out. Don't try and talk on something that is like you're learning it for the first time and you're pulling something together. Talk about something you do day in, day out. So when you get up on the stage, you're confident in what you're saying. You don't have to rely on speaker notes because you're talking about something that is second nature to you. And that, I think, is, again, a really important part of building that confidence to get on stage.
Okay. With that, we came to the end of our show. And Amanda, this has been one of the most intellectually stimulating conversation I have had on this show. You have taken us from ancient Greek to modern serves, from Manchester newsroom to Brighton's SEO main stage. Now, where can our listeners find you, connect with you, and follow your work?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn at Amanda Walls. Yeah, I'd love to connect with you guys, and that would be great.
Okay. And once again, thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you very much.
And if you enjoyed this episode, smash that subscribe button, leave a review, and share it with the fellow agency owners who needs to hear this. This is Navneet Kaushal from the Agency Insider Show. See you next time.